Hey, this is The Good, the Bad, and the Wrestling, a Tony James podcast. And as always, the bells of justice are ringing. Before we get going, hey, meet me. Facebook, GBW podcast. Check me out. YouTube, The Good, the Bad, the Wrestling, a Tony James podcast. And you can catch the exact same title over on Spotify. We got a big one for you today. The NWA versus the WWF. I have picked, count them, 10 events that I feel started the rivalry and ended the rivalry and got us to where we're at with modern wrestling today. Buzzkill, spoiler. It has nothing to do with Vince Russo, nothing to do with Eric Bischoff. Nothing to do with the Montreal Screwjob, nothing to do with the Click, nothing to do with the Curtain Call, nothing to do with the Vader Michaels, anybody with Michaels in the mid-90s. It has nothing to do with Bret Hart not drawing well. It has nothing to do with the Hogan-Sullivan that feud that they had going. I wanted to call, they're not the Faces of Fear, but you know what I'm talking about, when Sullivan brought in all of Hogan's old enemies and they tried to dress it up like it was something new. Hogan taking the Macho Man elbow and no selling it because they're in a tag team, which happened all the time in the WWF. Bash at the Beach 2000. Nope. When you dig deep enough, you get to the origin and what really happened. And I believe that at the very beginning, 10 events occurred that started and ended the NWA WWF feud, and after the 10th event, you got what you got. Everything else is like a domino effect. It's like it's almost, if you think about it, if you could go back and change one moment in time, right? A buddy of mine, Chris, always said if he could go back and change one moment in time, it would be David Von Erich wouldn't die because he was so savvy when it came to TV. He was going to be the next NWA champion. And I was with him on that for a very long time. And then I started hearing different shoot interviews about the Von Erich clan, how the dad ran the territory. Eric Embry just came out recently and did a shoot interview. I don't think that would have made a bit of difference. There's a reason I'm not talking about, and we're not talking about the NWA versus the AWA versus CCW versus WWF versus whoever you want to put in that other realm. They couldn't get out of their own way. When it comes down to it, it was Jim Crockett Promotions / NWA, Jim Crockett Promotions NWA versus the WWF with Vince McMahon. That's what we're going to talk about today. You understand? So I can't wait to start. Before we do, once again, don't forget to hit me up over on Facebook at GBW Podcast, YouTube, The Good, the Bad, and the Wrestling, a Tony James podcast, and of course over on Spotify. You can catch me in the exact same title. All right. I don't want to prolong this any longer. Let me get a drink here. Here we go. Number one, the Capital Wrestling Corporation, or the CWC, breaks free from the NWA and renames themselves the WWF, or the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, on January 24th, 1963. This was due to a booking dispute that the NWA wanted Buddy Rogers to drop the NWA title to Lou Thez. Vince McMahon Sr. said, "No way, Jose." They couldn't come to terms, and the WWF was born. Remember, all the other little territories fell under the NWA umbrella. The NWA, of course, was the most celebrated title. It was the world title. Vince McMahon Sr. created the WWF and did away with the Capital Wrestling Corporation. Of course, as you know, Bruno Sammartino went on to get the belt, hold it for many years. But that's my first one. I set the tone. Bang. If they don't, like if they go, yeah, buddy, you'll drop it, we don't have this problem. If the NWA says, okay, buddy can keep it, we don't have this problem. That's it. Whether it's sometimes fireworks don't go off. It is what it is. That's number one. So what's number two? I believe the second event happened from 78 to 83 during the Bob Backlund championship reign. And I believe this pattern of title holders flipped in the 90s, where the NWA, or later to be known as the WCW, didn't flip. I know you're going to say, Tony, they flipped the championship a lot, not like the WWF did in the 90s. But where did it start? It all started in 78 to 83. So, of course, as we know, Bruno, after his second title reign, gets beat by superstar Billy Graham, 77 to 78. Now, as we know in the booking, Vince McMahon Sr. knew when a guy was going to win it, when he was going to drop it, and they got people ready for that next run, no matter who it was. We all know the story that Superstar went to him, said, we got money here, this is going to happen, and he said, no, this is what we're doing, Bob Backlund's getting the title. Now, that's a whole nother podcast, which we can talk about, Superstar being ahead of his time. I do argue that knowing he had a hip problem in 86, 87, I don't think that changes. He is the current, or he could have been the modern day or the original, like Hulk Hogan type character, but at some point he wasn't going to have the longevity. But that's a whole nother thing. I'm talking about the second event in the NWA versus WWF feud was when Bob Backlund was champ. Now, within Bob Backlund's 78 to 83 reign, he lost to Antonio Inoki in 79, and they did not recognize it. He got it back, of course, like briefly within days. And there was another recorded title drop that they didn't record as well. Other than that, he dropped it to the Iron Sheik, and that was it. Okay, so you're probably saying, okay, well, they had one champ. He wanted to repeat what he was doing with Bruno Sammartino no matter what. No matter what. On the other side, listen to this. While Backlund had the title, this is what happened in the NWA. Harley Race had it from 77 to 79. Dusty Rhodes had it in 79. Harley Race won it back in 79. Giant Baba beat Harley Race in 79. Harley Race won it back 79 to 80. Giant Baba won it in 80. Harley Race won it back 80 to 81. Tommy Rich won it. Guess who won it back? Harley Race in 81. Dusty Rhodes won it from Harley Race in 81. Ric Flair beat Dusty Rhodes 81 to 83. There are three changes that happened between 83 and 83 Harley Race beating Ric Flair, which was the Midnight Rider, Jackie Veneno, I hope I'm not butchering that name, and then Carlos Colon, who they all beat. Of course, Midnight Rider beat him, but he had to take his mask off. He wouldn't do it because Dusty Rhodes was suspended. And then the other two happened, of course, in Puerto Rico, and Ric Flair didn't want to get murdered. So he dropped the belt, and they got it back later. Harley Race won it in 83. Ric Flair beat Harley Race in 83. Now, I know what you're saying, Tony. That's what they did with Ric Flair. Yeah, that's what they did with Ric Flair in the 80s. And then he left. And then they brought him back, and then they phased him out in the title switch. Now, I listen, this pattern, I know what you're going to say, Tony, you're wrong. Okay, I'm just saying you see this pattern in the 90s, and you see it in the early 2000s with the WWF as well, WWE, where they bring a guy in, they build him up, they put the title on, he drops it, you don't hear from him anymore. The next guy gets it, you don't hear from him anymore. I mean, when you go back and look at the title history in the WWF, I believe Hulk Hogan was number 9. He had it for a year. The other guy had it for a year. And once they got into the 90s, everybody touched it. It wasn't really that big of a deal. This was the NWA at the time, and this is Harley Race. Harley Race was the champ. He fed it to someone and took it back, and then Ric Flair took that over. So I believe the second biggest event between the WWF and the NWA was Backlund being champ and what NWA was doing with their title. Now, I think it was a hindrance to the WWF to have Backlund for a champ for that long. I would have dropped it back to Superstar. It would have been a totally different lay of the land when it came to those two companies. But I believe this was the second event that kind of got things rolling. Now, I know what you're saying. That wasn't a big deal, but I'm saying you're going to see that pattern come up. You get it when you see a pattern, when you see something you want to do, you can see what the NWA like to do. One major champ, he drops it, he keeps it, he drops it, he keeps it. WWF was, I got a guy, I keep a guy. Look at Bruno Sammartino. They had a transitional heel champ. Pedro Morales had it for a very long time. He dropped it to a transitional heel. Sammartino picked it up, dropped it for Superstar for a year. Backlund picked it up and kept it for a while. Iron Sheik won it, kept it for a month. Hogan kept it for 4 years. So I think that Backlund was a poor choice, but nonetheless, it was the pattern, the title pattern that I think was number 2. Number 3. This is a combo, and it's a short one. January 84, Hogan takes over as champ. The NWA's Jim Crockett Promotions in 1985. I guess you could say officially they're recognized as that, even though they've been a part of it. He kind of takes over the TV from Vince McMahon, repackages Georgia Championship Wrestling, and JCP begins. Don't forget WrestleMania 1 occurred in 1985. Now, we know Vince McMahon did not invent the wheel. He did not invent professional wrestling, and he did not invent pay-per-view. You already had Starrcade and all that going on, but it was the way in which Vince McMahon did WrestleMania 1 using Hulk Hogan that I think is the third event that started this. Now, these 3 things that I'm talking about, Vince McMahon Sr. breaking away from the NWA, the difference between how they have their champions hold the belt, and then WrestleMania 1 versus JCP taking over NWA. Those are setting the tone for the battle, for the feud, for the competition. That's all you see in the magazines. Now, I know what you're saying. Hey, what about the AWA? Yeah, Vern Gagne and Nick Bockwinkel. They screwed the pooch on Hogan and let him leave. They finally got Rick Martel. If you remember, Pro Wrestling Illustrated ran a great little fantasy tournament where it was Hogan versus Martel versus Flair, and it was a big deal. Hansen came in. They didn't do much with Hansen, which was a mistake. But other than that, you really didn't hear much about the AWA. And same thing with World Class Championship Wrestling. It was all about the Von Erichs. Nothing much going on there. So NWA versus WWF. Don't forget, way off in the weeds, a man named Magnum TA is being made in the Mid-South area. Keep a pin in that, please. So my 4th event happens in August of 86. That is the big event, Hulk Hogan versus Paul Orndorff. I think this is the 4th event that just kind of gets the big wheels rolling. It's a huge outdoor event, 60-some, 70-some thousand people outdoors. Hogan versus Orndorff. It was a huge card, huge card. On the other side, the NWA, which I felt this was a big deal. The NWA's Jim Crockett Senior Memorial Cup, April 19th, 1986. I feel, okay, WrestleMania 2 was awesome, but really didn't put the dent in that they thought they would. So then NWA responds with the Crockett Senior Memorial Cup. I thought this was awesome. I wish it was more accessible. You really had to get your hands on it. You had to have a satellite. You had to have a tape trade. Go back and watch this. They've got Mid-South defending the North American title, Dusty Rhodes versus Ric Flair. The main event was the Road Warriors versus Magnum TA and Ronnie Garvin. Magnum TA was your U.S. champion who he beat Wahoo McDaniel, lost it to Tully Blanchard, had the amazing I Quit match, got the belt back, and then started a feud with Nikita Koloff for the best of 7. I'm not talking about those, though. I feel this is where I thought the NWA was getting traction on the WWF. And the WWF had to answer with something, and that was the big event in August of '86. But the Crockett Cup, to me, was a big deal. Once again, especially the main event. You had all these tag teams from all over, from different companies, AWA, New Japan, all Japan. I don't think WCCW had one, but there was a couple from Mid-South, Memphis. They were everywhere. And it was a great tournament. It was a 2-day thing. It was awesome. So I'm going to give the nod to the NWA on number 4 there. Even though the big event was great, it was a great answer to the Crockett Cup. But that Crockett Cup gave the NWA, from April, I feel, to the rest of the year, great momentum. Now, number 5. We're halfway through the list, and I think this is where the world stopped. WWF, WrestleMania 3, March 29th, 1987, was the WWF's 5th event. On the NWA side, October 14th, 1986, Magnum TA car crash. And I slashed it with April 9th of the following year in '87, buying the UWF. So, and I put those two kind of together. So let's take a look at this. Jim Crockett Promotions. Jim Crockett did a shoot interview with Conrad Thompson, and he said, point blank, when they did WrestleMania 3, I knew they got me. Just the power, the venue, the aesthetics, everything. WrestleMania 3 was a huge, not just punch to the gut, but punch to the face, punch to the jaw, punched your mother. Boom, right in the face. Now, the Crockett Cup was awesome. They were in the midst of finishing up the best of 7 with Magnum TA and Nikita Koloff. We all know that Magnum TA was tapped to be the next NWA World Heavyweight Champion. He was the NWA, Jim Crockett Promotions, answer to Hulk Hogan. Magnum TA. That's their guy. He's the guy. Okay? Number 5, the 5th event, WrestleMania 3. Jim Crockett is like, holy crap, we're done. Why does he feel that way? Because the 5th event for NWA was Magnum TA getting in a car crash. And then, in April 9th, he buys UWF. Now, people think he bought it because he wanted to be a high roller and Dusty told him to. Jim Crockett said he had to have a certain number of TV affiliates to be able to make money. And I think he said it was 110 affiliates to have money coming in. So they bought those rights to get that from the UWF, not realizing, because he didn't do his due diligence, all the debt he accrued. And then because of all that, the money he did make off of those TV rights, he never saw. Because shortly after that, we know he ends up selling in '88. But he was hoping, as a strategical move, buying those TV rights was going to help me using the UWF, because they already had those locations that put him up over 110. And I'm not a TV guy, so I can't go into math to help you understand that. But that's huge. Jim Crockett himself saying WrestleMania 3 kind of really did us in. And I believe if Magnum TA doesn't wreck his car, he probably wins the world title at Starrcade, or the following year in '87. Either in Starrcade '86 he wins the world title, or Great American Bash '87 he wins the world title. And I believe that's where it stays on him for the rest of the '80s. That's what I believe. I think Ric Flair becomes a heel that chases him. I don't know what they do with him, but that's another thing. Ric Flair doesn't get to his numerous amounts of title reigns if Magnum TA doesn't wreck his car. So there's number 5. Number 6. This is a big one, but it's obvious. People talk about this all the time. The Survivor Series, November 26, 1987. Starrcade 1987 in Chicago. Jim Crockett moved it to a matinee time rather than an evening time, so it wouldn't go head-to-head with Survivor Series. As we know, Vince did it intentionally. And, of course, Starrcade went to Chicago instead of staying in Greensboro or doing something local. They decided to go to Chicago, and the rest is history. We feel, and I feel, that Vince probably knew WrestleMania 3 could be the death blow. Magnum TA's car crash. They don't have their next guy. I'm going head to head. I'm creating Survivor Series. They're done. Okay? And that's when they bring Andre back, and we see Andre for the first time since WrestleMania 3, and his team wins. There you go. And then Starrcade 87, Dusty wins the U.S. title from Lex Luger. I believe that's where Ronnie Garvin beats Ric Flair. Now, they always talk about who was going to replace Magnum TA. They thought Sting was too young. I always felt Barry Windham was the man. Now, according to Jim Crockett and according to David Crockett, he was the next guy, but he always took off. Dusty would build him up. They would do something with Barry, and right when they were going to do something major, Barry took off. So they couldn't trust him, as in staying long term. So that's why they didn't use him. Sting wasn't ready, and so they felt Ronnie Garvin was the only thing they had. So, and he didn't keep it long either. He, just like they did with Harley Race, he pitched it back to Ric Flair, and now Ric Flair is your go-to guy once again because Magnum TA's out. So that was number 6. Number 7. This is a good one. And this just shows you the momentum the WWF had. Number 7, February 5th, 1988, the main event, Hogan versus Andre 2. They got a 15.2 rating, 33 million views. March 27th, 1988. It was the first Clash of Champions. That was their answer to WrestleMania 4. No, excuse me. Yeah, 4. It was the birth of Sting. He went Broadway with Ric Flair. Why they didn't put the title on him is beyond me. That was their perfect opportunity, and then feed him heels that know what they're doing so they can lead the matches and keep the belt on Sting for a while. But no, they didn't do that. And later we found out that through the Dusty Ric Flair feud behind the scenes, many times Ric Flair said, if I got to put someone over, I'm leaving. And they didn't want to lose Ric Flair because, of course, Magnum TA wasn't around anymore, and he was their flagship, so they always buckled. Clash of Champions 1 got a 5.6 rating. Think about that. The main event, February 5th, 15.2 rating, 33 million views. Clash of Champions 1 got a 5.6 rating, which beats probably anything in modern day today. But a 5.6 to a 15.2 kind of tells you where things were rolling. Number 8, WWF side, SummerSlam 88, August 29, 1988. Madison Square Garden, Mega Powers versus the Mega Bucks. Hogan wasn't champ. Macho Man was. Jim Crockett Promotion sells to WCW November 2nd, 1988. So let's take a look. We know who the champ was. So if you remember, you go back to what I was saying where 78 to 83. So who were the champs 84 to 88? Hogan and Savage just started his reign. Who were the champs 84 to 88? Jim Crockett Promotions before they sold it to WCW. Ric Flair, Kerry Von Erich, Ric Flair to Dusty Rhodes, back to Ric Flair to Ron Garvin to Ric Flair. It wasn't a new guy until Steamboat in '89. So they followed the Harley Race pattern, and on the other side, they stuck to one champion. And if there is a new champion, he keeps it for a brief amount of time, and you give it back to your workhorse. See the difference? That was number 8. Number 9, June 2nd, 1989, No Holds Barred. Saturday night's main event, cage match versus Big Boss Man. They're promoting a movie that the WWF made. Hogan wrestles Boss Man in a steel cage. They introduced Zeus as a real wrestler, not just a guy in the movies. People bought it. The superplex off the top of the cage, Hogan Boss Man, of course, if you're paying attention, you know, they ran that around the loop at Madison Square Garden in a regular cage, not the big blue cage, but in a regular cage in Philadelphia and Boston, I believe, to test it before Hogan won the title. Hogan wins the title, boom. Saturday night's main event. On the other side, Steamboat wins the title in 1989. So Steamboat leaves WWF, and Jim Crockett is on record saying way back at the beginning of my list, when Steamboat showed up for WrestleMania 1, he felt his mistake was letting Steamboat go. However, we know Steamboat left because he didn't like how he was being booked by Dusty Rhodes. Dusty Rhodes wasn't using him. Dusty Rhodes was piggybacking off Ricky Steamboat. Ricky Steamboat was doing all those Broadways with Ric Flair. He got upset with how Dusty was using him or not using him, and then went to WrestleMania 1, and that was the big regret that Jim Crockett had. He always felt, when asked about Roddy Piper, he felt Roddy Piper was always a Vince guy, that kind of style, but Rick Steamboat, we should have kept him. Well, he gets his chance in 1989, and then, of course, they don't keep it on him long, and Steamboat has always said he wished he would have had the belt longer. But there's a couple things you got to remember with Ric Flair. Number one, if he did decide to do the deal, he was getting it back. And number two, he had a $20,000 deposit on the belt. And so unless you were going to put 20 grand up and give him his 20 grand back, that belt eventually was getting back to Ric Flair, because we know that's one of the reasons why he took it with him to the WWF. He goes, you owe me my deposit, and they weren't going to pay him. And he's like, well, then I'm keeping the belt. So number 9 was the WWF just going in a different direction and creating material in different outlets and having that huge Saturday night main event match, and then Steamboat on the other side winning the title. And then finally, number 10. To me, this is it. Bang. This is it, and then I'll explain where I'm going with this. Number 10, WrestleMania 6, Hogan versus Warrior, April 1st, 1990. Hogan loses clean to the Warrior. This is their signal of saying, we have found our Bob Backlund. If Hogan is the equivalent to San Martino, Warrior is Backlund, and the goal was to keep Warrior now. On the other side, Sting defeats Ric Flair July 7th, 1990, Great American Bash. He ends up dropping to Flair in January of 91. The title goes vacant. Flair goes to the WWF in 91. Sting was their answer to Flair finally. And then he ends up giving it back to Flair, which I don't understand. And Warrior didn't keep it long. He kept it for about a year. So briefly, real quick, my top 10 reasons. Vince Sr. breaking away, the title patterns, WrestleMania 1 versus Jim Crockett taking over the NWA, the big event versus Crockett Cup, WrestleMania 3 Magnum TA car crash, them buying the UWF, Survivor Series versus Starrcade, the main event versus Clash of the Champions, SummerSlam versus WCW buying JCP, No Holds Barred Saturday night main event versus Steamboat winning. Hogan dropping to Warrior, Flair dropping to Sting. Now, those are the 10 events that I feel get us to modern day. So, Tony, what's the deal with those? Well, I just gave you the timeline. Booking, when you look at the booking, perfect example in 85, we're going to use Kamala. Kamala went into the NWA to feud with Magnum TA, but they didn't do much with him, and they did the Great American Bash. Kamala said, "You're not going to give me a belly-to-belly and pin me clean." That's what they wanted. They wanted a quick match like he was doing on TV, and Kamala was like, "We're not doing that." So that's why you get the finish you got, the interference, and then Magnum TA bellies to bellies, it gives him a belly-to-belly anyway, and then he himself counts 3 to kind of do what he wants anyway. He slams him with no problem whatsoever. Compare that to how they booked Kamala versus Hogan. Hogan is much bigger than Magnum TA, but Hogan sold his butt off to all his heels, Kamala, and look what they did with Kamala. Kamala was always around, but they went around the horn and used Kamala to set Andre up for Hogan. I mean, think about all that December, January, February, Kamala, he did Boston Garden, Spectrum, the Madison Square Garden stuff, along with the blow-off of Madison Square Garden. And Hogan always made it look like an effort to try to slam Kamala, and he didn't always slam Kamala. So the booking and the psychology of that always confused me, which Kamala, before he passed in an interview, actually talked about how when he worked Hogan, Hogan always protected you, whereas they were like, "You're going to lose real quick. He's going to hit you with the belly to belly." And Kamal was like, "No, we're not doing that." But he ended up throwing it in there anyway. So stuff like that. As I stated before, Flair held him up hostage, especially after the car accident of Magnum TA. And that's why they decided we'd rather have Flair. If we have to pick, Dusty can go, we'll keep Flair. And then, of course, pardon me, how the Crockett brothers talk about the death nail, so to speak, around WrestleMania 3 time, which also coincides with the accident of Magnum TA. When you look at the bookings as well, I always thought that NWA on Saturday and Sundays, you got to see squash matches, but you got to see the big names. Here's my pet peeve about the Four Horsemen. In their interviews, they always complain about Dusty always getting over on them, and they never got their, we never got to do this, and we always had to put him over on house shows or something like that. They always had the belts. Tully Blanchard always had a belt around his waist. Iron Anderson had 2. Ric Flair was the world champion. If you were a Four Horseman, Barry Windham had a title. Lex Luger had a title. Ole Anderson. You're telling me when the Four Horsemen started, I'm supposed to believe that Ole, Iron are babe magnets, and the women love them because of Flair and Tully. Give me a break. And they were always strong on TV, and they always had titles. Dusty was clever. He would win a title, drop it real quick, just to say he had the title. People were starting to get a little upset with the Dusty finish. I know Jim Crockett felt that the Dusty finish when he won the title before '86, when I think it was the Joe Louis was the ref, he felt that he should have won, but Ric Flair said, "I'm not dropping it or I'm leaving." And that's where the Dusty finish came up. On the WWF side, when you feuded with Hogan, it was a year-long feud. And he might be feuding with 2, maybe 3 guys at a time, but you just didn't do a one and done. If you could make money with him, he put you over. And I know people say, "Oh, he always had to win." Well, it's a work, right? Okay, good. So, because they've come out and told you that a million times now. Go back and change it. What would you do? Have Hogan lose? You know how over he was? He could lose without getting pinned. They could do all these shoddy different finishes to build these heels up to make you think they were going to win. And then that's how they kept Hogan fresh. One Man Gang talks about it all the time, how the way they built him up, people actually thought he was going to be the guy that beat Hogan. And if you remember, One Man Gang came in post WrestleMania 3. They kept it going with the big man. And you didn't see a lot of that. They ran Dusty and Flair into the ground. And of course, when Magnum crashed, then they were kind of stuck. And then that's why they had to go to Ronnie Garvin. And then, of course, Dusty left to go to the WWF. And that was about the time WCW bought him. And at that time, you get what you get now. I gave you the top 10. To me, after WrestleMania 6, everything was put into place. Talent-wise, WWF had the talent. They had the booking. They had the major events. And their style of wrestling was getting over. Okay? NWA/WCW had to rebuild. They were rebuilding, trying to find themselves. And they shot themselves in the foot 2 or 3 times with bringing in new leaders. Whether it was Bill Watts or the pizza guy or the guy who created the ding dongs. They could not get their footing. So to me, when they blame when Hogan came to WCW and then he brought all his buddies and no one got a chance, and then they fired Triple H, Cactus Jack, and Steve Austin. Wrestling was already set to where it was going to be before that stuff happened. I'm telling you. 78, or actually before that, if you want to go clear back to 63, when Vince McMahon Sr. created his own company. But up to 90, everything was put into motion on what was going to happen in the future. So we can do a 91 to present day if you want, what events. But to me, those events already happened. If you look at those events once again, if you take one of those out, it does change the lay of the land in professional wrestling. So let me review them real quick with you. Number 1, CWC drops out, becomes the WWF, 1963. Number 2, Bob Backlund is the champ until Sheik beats him. Harley Race goes in and out with 3 or 4 different guys. Number 3, WrestleMania 1, the birth of Hulkamania versus Jim Crockett Promotions being the lead on the NWA in 85. Number 4, the big event versus the first Jim Crockett Senior Memorial Cup. Number 5, WrestleMania 3 versus Magnum TA's car crash and the buying of the UWF on April 9th of 87. 6, Survivor Series versus Starrcade. 7, the main event versus Clash of the Champions, a 15.2 rating versus a 5.6. Number 8, SummerSlam 88 versus JCP selling WCW to JCP selling to WCW in 1988. And then if you go back and look at the title change again, Hogan had the belt. Savage was starting his reign. Flair dropped to Von Erich, won it back. Rhodes won it back. Garvin won it back. And then Steamboat finally wins it in 89, which is number 9, versus the whole no-holds-barred movie cage match with Big Boss Man and Zeus. And then finally, the last thing that I feel puts an end to the WWF-NWA feud, competition, everything, was WrestleMania 6. Now, we know Hogan came back, got the belt from Slaughter. All that stuff was transitioned into what they had now. Once Warrior beat Hogan, that was them telling everybody, even if Hogan comes back, we're looking for somebody new. Sting beating Flair was their same message. I think that was too late. He drops it back to Flair, just like Hogan gets the belt back. And then he ends up leaving and taking the belt with him. And they have Wyndham and Luger fight in a cage for the title, and they put the belt on Luger. So, and then of course we know Hogan wins the belt back, drops it to Undertaker. They put it up in the Royal Rumble, and then you have the new dawn of new champions, and that is where it kind of flips. Because the NWA, Muta wins it, Barry Windham finally becomes champion. Then Flair comes back, and they give the belt right back to Flair. So see, you can't say Bischoff, Russo, all that stuff, the Click, the curtain call, the screw job, all that stuff is a byproduct of these 10 events. The NWA was done. It was WCW. They couldn't rebuild, even when they brought in Hogan. The NWO spike stuff. But I'm telling you, these 10 events are the 10 events, in my opinion, that started the competition and ended the competition. The 90s are a byproduct of the NWA side trying to rebuild and compete, and they can't. The WWF side, even though they had the talent, couldn't draw. Why is that? Because their booking, their psychology, and their characters changed. They went to real crazy, the magician, the Minotaur, and then you had different things happening in psychology of matches that just didn't make sense, and people were burnt out. And then they both had a resurgence in the late 90s with the NWO and the Attitude Era. And what did that run for? 3 to 4 years? And then WCW sold out, Vince McMahon bought them, and now you're just a brand. You got guys trying to relive the past and steal from the past and use the past, and nowadays, to me, it's not even, they call it entertainment. They want you to call it entertainment. It is not pro wrestling. But once again, I sound like a broken record, and that's why I'm doing this podcast. I won't scratch the needle. But those 10 events happened. And right around number 5, which is WrestleMania 3, that is where, even if WrestleMania 3 goes off like it did, if Magnum TA becomes NWA World Champion, they have someone to compete with Hogan. And WrestleMania 3 isn't as big as a shot to the NWA. Because like I said, Magnum TA probably, if I'm booking and I see that what happens, I'm putting the title on Magnum TA in Starrcade of 87. That's what I'm doing, because WrestleMania happens in March. I would feud him with Flair through Starrcade. And probably, no, I would put the belt on Magnum in 87, Great American Bash, shortly after WrestleMania 3. Because you got to give it to the NWA when it came to the Great American Bash, especially the year, and I believe it was in 86, when Flair had to defend his title. He had 30 title defenses in the month of July. Dusty beat him on 27 and then gave him a return match on 30, and he won it back. But what a great idea. What a concept. Great American Bash was rolling, coming off of the Jim Crockett Senior Memorial Cup. When you watch Jim Crockett 2 Cup in 87, it's nothing compared to the first one. They bring Magnum TA back, and Dusty plays it for all he can with the superpowers, but it was a shot in the arm. Nikita Koloff didn't last long as a face. It was a great short run, and then Dusty wins the U.S. title, and Nikita goes away. The best match on the entire card is Barry Windham versus Ric Flair, and they should have put the belt on Windham, and they don't. So those booking things, and combined with these 10 things along with their roster, that's why you have what you have today. And that's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. I hope you enjoyed this. Please look me up on Facebook at GBW Podcast. Look me up on YouTube at the Good, the Bad, and the Wrestling and Tony James Podcast, and you can find the same title on Spotify. This was the NWA versus the WWF. What could have been, what should have been, what really was. I don't blame what everyone else blames in the 90s and early 2000s for where we're going today. First off, hats off to modern wrestling. It's your time to shine. It's your time to do whatever it is you want to do. You have a huge influence on indie wrestling. Whether I agree with it or not, I like the guys that are trying to show you a little glimpse of what it used to be in the indies with the old style of wrestling versus the new. But I'm not going to poo-poo the new, because let the new guys run. Let's see how far they can take it. And if they can, great. If they don't, what is old is new again. But this just shows you what could have happened if Magnum TA was still around. I WrestleMania 3 Magnum TA, the fifth event that I feel really changes things because everybody involved admits to it. Keep in mind, though, you take one of these events out, it changes the landscape. But my whole point today was because of booking, because of roster, and in the timeline, that we are here today because of those 10 events. Hey, guess what? You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. God is good, and I want to thank you for tuning in, and I will see you at the matches.
Countless.